This episode contains graphic content that may not be suitable for all ages. Listener discretion is advised. If you or someone you know is struggling or in crisis, help is available. Call or text 988 or chat with someone at 988lifeline.org. Those outside of the US, reach out to someone at your local crisis center or hotline. Please do not suffer in silence. For a few years, as longtime listeners of the show might remember, I lived down in Georgia. The state, not the country. I lived over on the eastern side of the state, in Augusta, roughly 2 hours east of Atlanta and halfway between it and Savannah, located over on the coast. Despite it being a little hot for my liking, I enjoyed my time there. Everything was pretty cheap, it was nice and quiet, and I had a decent amount of friends to keep me busy. However, it was admittedly a bit of a boring area. At least when it came to nightlife or things to do in general. There in Augusta, you would occasionally get an interesting concert or stand-up show, but more often than not, you would have to drive over to Atlanta for any real excitement. The drive between Augusta and Atlanta is a pretty easy one. You pretty much hop on Interstate 20 for the entirety of it, and stay on that until you reach your destination. Or at least until you hit Atlanta's endless labyrinth of exit ramps and connecting highways, which sometimes give you a quarter mile to get over 5 lanes, but that's a subject for another day. Whenever I made this drive, I'd always pass by one scenic and serene destination, Lake Oconee. If you happened to be driving by near sunset, the sun would be shining down perfectly on the water, reflecting beautifully and casting this amber glow on the surrounding foliage. I'm sorry for getting a little poetic, but as someone who made this drive quite a few times, this was always my favorite part of it. It was like this oasis in the middle of 100 miles of swamps and forest, and it was a nice way to catch a neat view and daydream of one day living in a picturesque community like that. Yet, every time I drove past Lake Oconee, I would get an odd feeling. You see, back in 2014, a year before this podcast even started, a grisly crime took place there, and it would send shockwaves throughout the entire community. These shockwaves were still felt years later when I made this drive to Atlanta, and the story resonates today, an entire decade later, as the community and the victims' loved ones wait for answers. This is the story of the Lake Oconee murders. Russell and Shirley Dermond were an elderly couple that lived along the scenic Lake Oconee, located in the middle of Putnam County, Georgia, about an hour east of Atlanta and roughly 12 miles northeast of Eatonton. Here at their beautiful 4-bedroom home overlooking the lake itself, the Dermonds had been enjoying retired life for about a decade. Having both been born and raised in New Jersey in the 1920s, the Dermonds had been married for 62 years as of 2014. They had 4 children together, 3 sons and 1 daughter, although by the time they retired, one of their sons had already died. Their oldest, Mark, had been killed in downtown Atlanta in 2000 while attempting to buy drugs near the Georgia Dome. However, years later, Russell and Shirley remained close with their other 3 children. Leslie, who lived in Asheville, North Carolina, Keith, who lived in Jacksonville, Florida, and Bradley, who lived in Santa Rosa Beach, Florida. Combined, they had 9 grandchildren, who the Dermonds also had good relationships with. Having served in World War II as a member of the US Navy, Russell had then spent years working as an executive for a clock manufacturer. However, in the late 1980s, the Dermonds moved down to Roswell, Georgia for what they described as Russell's semi-retirement. There in Roswell, a suburb on the northern outskirts of Atlanta, Russell began managing a chain of Hardee's fast food restaurants. But around the year 2000, the Dermonds officially settled into their retirement by purchasing the home along Lake Oconee. They had been drawn to the scenic area because it was located right next to a golf course, and Russell loved golf, having played in tournaments for some time. But over time, they would begin to appreciate everything that the community had to offer, including the gated community's sense of safety, which was invaluable to them as they got older. By the spring of 2014, the Dermonds had been married for more than 6 decades and were now in their late 80s. The community they lived in, Great Waters, was a pretty typical yet privileged retirement community. As I mentioned a moment ago, there was a scenic golf course nearby overlooking the lake, which Russell walked along during his frequent strolls. He had given up golf a few years earlier, but he still enjoyed walking the course, when he wasn't reading, of course. Meanwhile, Shirley had taken up playing bridge with her friends in nearby Eatonton, and was an avid crossword puzzler. The Dermonds had settled into a routine, and things inside their home were laid out according to their comfort. They would regularly see friends in the community, would schedule regular visits with their family, and even attended church on the weekends. Here, at their home alongside Lake Oconee, they planned on spending the rest of their days living in peace and tranquility. For the Dermonds, nothing seemed out of the ordinary until the first weekend of May 2014. Saturday, May 3rd, 2014, was the date of the 140th Kentucky Derby, the largest event in horse racing, which was ultimately won by the horse California Chrome. While we're not going to dive into horse racing in this episode, don't worry, this date and event is relevant because Russell and Shirley Dermond had made plans with a neighbor to attend their Kentucky Derby watch party. But that afternoon, they would prove to be no-shows, something that was very unlike them. Normally, if they were to miss something, they would have called beforehand, or at least apologized immediately afterward for not showing up. But even after the race, hours passed, then days. Nobody spoke with or saw the Dermonds, which was also incredibly unlike them. Russell normally walked the golf course every day, and Shirley was in constant communication with her friends nearby. Both were conspicuously absent through not only the weekend, but early into the next week. On Tuesday, May 6th, 3 days after the Kentucky Derby watch party, the Dermonds' friends who lived up the road decided to check in on them. These neighbors, a husband and wife who were 75 and 68 years old respectively, had hosted the Kentucky Derby event from that weekend and had been growing worried about Russell and Shirley, who lived just a mile down the road from them. Early that Tuesday, they decided to make a house call and check in on the older couple, who had not been seen or answered their phone in roughly 4 days. The couple arrived at the Dermonds' home along Carolyn Drive that morning and noticed at least 2 newspapers in their driveway, which had been delivered that Sunday and Monday. They approached the front door and attempted to rouse the Dermonds inside, but were surprised when they tried the doorknob. It was unlocked. Growing increasingly worried, the friends let themselves in and began looking for any sign of Shirley or Russell. Inside, nothing seemed to be out of order. The home had not been ransacked or anything like that, but it was as if the Dermonds had simply vanished into thin air. The friends looked around their home for any sign of the older couple, who they morbidly feared might have been injured, or had a health incident that prevented them from seeking help, something like that. Throughout the home, they found nothing. No sign of Russell or Shirley could be found. Eventually, though, the friends made their way out to the Dermonds' garage, which is where they made a gruesome discovery. There in the garage, the couple found the body of 88-year-old Russell Dermond laying between his and Shirley's parked vehicles. He was laying face up, but was surrounded by a pool of blood. Blood that had come from a horrifying wound he had sustained. Russell Dermond had been decapitated, and his head was nowhere to be found. Meanwhile, his wife, 87-year-old Shirley Dermond, was also missing. The married couple that made this discovery would call 911 moments later and alert police to a crime scene that became part of the most terrifying and mysterious investigation that any of these officers would ever take part in.
Putnam County 911.
Yes, I have an emergency.
Okay.
I think I have somebody dead.
Following the discovery of Russell Dermond's body inside of his garage, investigators set out to uncover exactly what had happened. However, the circumstances alarmed investigators, who had never seen a crime of that magnitude in this quiet, gated community. Sadly, the head of Russell Dermond was not easily recovered, clouding many of the details surrounding his death. A search of the crime scene and the Dermond home was unable to find any trace of Russell's head or clues related to the killer, and investigators would comb through both their home and the surrounding area extensively afterward. As police tried to make sense of the horrible crime, they tried to determine why someone would have targeted Russell or his now missing wife, Shirley. They were, after all, just some older retirees who'd lived a pretty normal, unassuming life. They had spent some time in the Atlanta and New York areas, but they had no known enemies, and other than Russell's time in the Navy during World War II, had not been involved in any dangerous or risky lines of work. They were not exorbitantly wealthy either, at least not compared to some of their neighbors. They didn't have a large collection of cash, jewelry, or art, which made a burglary seem unlikely. Additionally, there was no sign of forced entry, but the safety provided by their gated community might have given them enough confidence to not worry about simple safety procedures, such as locking their door. After all, when their friends showed up at the scene, their front door had been left unlocked, but it was impossible to tell if that was their doing or someone else's. While investigators tried to figure out how Russell Dermond had been killed and why the couple had been targeted, authorities began to set their sights on the more pressing issue of locating Russell's wife, Shirley. She was still missing, and likely had been since at least Saturday, May 3rd, 3 days before authorities were called out to the Dermonds' home. Wherever she was, she had left or been taken there without her phone or purse, which were both still found inside of her home. Local authorities began a frantic search to find the missing 87-year-old, bringing out search and cadaver dogs, organizing a large-scale search of the lake and surrounding area, and even showing her likeness on billboards all throughout the state. As it stood, police operated under the belief that Shirley had been kidnapped, and just days after discovering Russell's body, Putnam County Sheriff Howard Sills would speak at a press conference.
There haven't been many new developments today, but I will finally confirm for all of you that Mr. Dermond's head was decapitated, and we do not know the whereabouts of his head. The autopsy is still going on right now at the State Crime Lab in Atlanta. We are still interviewing neighbors and friends, and still pursuing the acquisition of financial records and those types of things. And we still do not know the whereabouts of Shirley Dermond. We have had false reports and rumors to the extent that we found Miss Dermond's body. We have not. I stress to everyone, as I have since the very first day of this, we need to assume, or at least pray, that Miss Dermond is still alive, and we desperately need to know her whereabouts. And obviously, we need to find, if possible, the remains of Mr. Dermond that we don't have in our possession.
Anything else found in the garage? Any kind of a weapon? Any kind of knife? Any hatchet? Anything?
Were there any blood stains in the garage?
Well,
I think that's the murder scene?
I don't know that that's the murder scene, but there's obviously blood.
Was the coroner able to give you a better sense of exactly what time this crime happened, or even narrow it down to a day?
No, we know that this happened sometime between, I know that this happened from other sources, mail deliveries, that it happened sometime Friday or Saturday, maybe early Sunday morning.
Have you looked at all the surveillance? I assume there's surveillance footage from the gated entrance. Is that?
We are trying to locate all surveillance footage anywhere in that area of this county. My detectives are out right now gathering video footage from stores even that we had no idea he might have gone to or might not have gone to.
Where was the body moved from?
I have no idea. I can tell you it was moved a couple of feet in the garage.
How heavy a man was he?
I would say, looking at it, about 150, 170 pounds.
Sheriff, you were able to determine if the decapitation happened, he died through decapitation, or he was murdered first and then that happened?
I'm not confirmed that yet. I would suspect it was post-mortem. I would suspect that. I do not know that.
Can you talk to us about what your investigators have been doing in the surrounding community, in the houses nearby, and then on the lake as well, in terms of what you were looking for?
Within a matter of 2 hours upon receiving this call, my patrol boats were in the water and we drugged the vicinity of this home. Obviously, we are not in a position it's humanly impossible to drag Lake Oconee. But we did that within a couple of hours. Yesterday, the Department of Natural Resources came with the most advanced sonar equipment they have, what we call sideman sonar, that depicts the bottom of the lake. Once again, we worked the area immediately adjacent to the home, I mean, if I mind telling you, we found a Christmas tree and a lawn chair on the bottom of the lake. Within an hour of responding to this call, our cadaver dogs had searched the immediate vicinity, the wooded area around the home. Not the entire green space there, but the entire area immediately adjacent to that. We've done that. We continue going from door to door, people on that street, the adjacent streets and things like that, and talking to people who are there. You know, this is no different, although this is a tremendous amount of media present, this is no different than we do any homicide investigation. You try to find out the whereabouts of people and who they had contact with, and we're doing that. We conduct it the same way I always have. When we have a violent crime and something I'm in command of, we throw all of our resources at it. And all of my detectives, as well as some other deputies, we've been assisted by the FBI and Jones County Sheriff's Office, Morgan County Sheriff's Office, and sheriffs throughout the state have offered to send us as many deputies as I want, but we don't have a point to look as far as the whereabouts of Mrs. Dermond. We looked in, like I said, we looked in the woods adjacent to the house, we looked in the lake, but as her pocketbook and things like that are there, cell phone is there, the car is there, you know, we don't have anything to track other than the image that we've given you to put out there for the public to see.
And you're still considering her a victim and not a suspect?
Let me tell you, the only person that's not a suspect is Sheriff Sills, because I know where I was. And, but given the totality of the circumstances of her age, the fact that he was decapitated, I certainly don't consider her a suspect, but can I absolutely say for certainty that she, no, I can't, but there's certainly nothing to indicate that, and everything to indicate that she is, has been abducted in some way.
What makes you think this is a random incident?
I don't think it's a random incident.
So what do you say to the community?
I think for whatever reason, these people were singled out for this. They're living in the most exclusive neighborhood, or one of the most exclusive neighborhoods in this county. It's not out on a major thoroughfare like Highway 441 or something like that, where some, you know, traveling serial killer might be just going through. They're on a cul-de-sac in a gated, multi-million-dollar resort community that we have no crime in. We virtually have no crime in that subdivision. I'm not going to tell you we work minor traffic accidents there. We respond to false burglar alarms. I'm sure we've had a golf club stolen or something like that, but I don't ever recall in the 18 years I've been sheriff of us even having a burglary there. So it's not the type of neighborhood for random crime. And it damn sure isn't the circumstances of a decapitated man, and an 88-year-old man in his home, being a random crime.
Do you think he was killed in the garage?
I don't know that.
Are there any leads in people who may have had malicious intent against this couple?
None that we've been able to determine.
Any motives?
None that we can.
What information has the family provided?
The family, the children are here, they're adult children, and they've been extremely cooperative, but they live in different states, and while they did have contact with their parents, they had not had contact with their parents in a couple of days.
Sure, can you say, have they indicated that there were any past troubles? Anybody who would have an issue, just even old business dealings? Have they shed any light on who would have
Mr. Dermond had been retired basically for about 2 decades, and they've lived here since 1994. And so, no, the answer to that's no.
Any health
It's not easy
issues
getting there by the
with
lake
family?
either. I mean, aren't they on like a real thin coat?
Well, you can, no, I mean, you can get there by the lake, certainly.
I mean, would you be visible? I mean, it's sort of like, with people, I mean, aren't all the homes right on the lake? I mean,
Oh, sure. I mean, but I mean, you got to understand, on our lakes here, people are fishing at 2 o'clock in the morning. It's not unusual to see fishermen casting lures up against docks anywhere on Lake Oconee or Lake Sinclair in Putnam County. That's not unusual.
Any health issues with the couple, anything that you knew about? Or?
Yeah, but I mean, nothing, I mean, there are health issues that I'm aware of through the family and medications and things like that are no different than the average person their age.
Based on your experience and your knowledge of this area, are you inclined to believe that whoever did this came from, accessed their home through the lake and not through the front gate, or is there anything that leads you one way or another?
No, there's nothing to tell us that it came from the water or from the ground. There's no, what I'm saying, we have no, these are paved streets, we have a dock with an immaculate dock with it's not any broken boards on it or anything. It's not there. I can't tell. Could it come from the water? Yes. Could it come from the street? Yes. Could it come from outer space? Yes. I don't. It's totally up.
Sheriff, this happened Friday night, Saturday morning, the potential abduction of Mr. Dermond. Does the fact that there is no errant ransom note, no communication, is that more and more disturbing as the hours go on and on?
Certainly it is. I mean, you've got such unusual circumstances here. The totality of these circumstances are very unusual. I mean, if it's an abduction, you would expect some sort of extortion demand. If it was assassination, you would think both of the people would be there, both bodies would be there. And then you have a totally nothing in their background that indicates anything like this, and then the area where it happened is not indicative of any kind of homicide, much less there's no domestic history.
How
They've
frustrating?
been married 68 years.
How frustrating is this for you, for your investigators, trying to get to the bottom of having to work 2 very different crimes with such an innocent couple?
Well, I can tell you that I worked many homicides in my career, and this quite candidly is the most frustrating one that I've ever worked so far.
Why is that?
Once again, the totality of the circumstances that I've explained to you, the very unusual factors that keep popping up, and no apparent enemies or things like that, nothing that made them particularly vulnerable, an area that was not vulnerable, all of that together.
You tell people to lock their doors now?
I tell people to lock their doors all the time. I'm the sheriff of this county. I'm the most heavily armed individual probably in it. I never get out of my vehicle that I don't lock my door and lock my own doors at night. And so I think everybody should do that. We live in a community that, compared to most of the communities you're from, it has no crime. But that doesn't mean that everyone should be cautious at all times.
Residents are panic, getting calls from people?
No, I wouldn't call it panic. What my biggest problem, to be honest, the truth about it, is false rumors that are being spread about. People are not panicked. This is a community that's capable, at least initially, protecting itself, I think, and I don't think you've got any panic. But this is still a small town, and that's an isolated community, and this hasn't happened before. So I don't care if it's Buckhead, Bangladesh. When you have a crime like this in the neighborhood, people are going to be upset.
Is there anything more specific that you could ask for from the public in terms of the type of information you're looking for, a time frame?
Anybody that has had recent contact, and I say recent contact, I'm talking about in the last week with the Dermonds, or certainly anybody who has seen Mrs. Dermond. That's what we're looking for, or anybody who knows about anything about these people, why these people, that they would be targeted, if they were targeted in this manner.
Can you confirm the FBI is investigating with you right now? Is it because it's going across state lines?
I asked the FBI in early because of the potential abduction, and they've assisted me I mean, we're talking, and before I walked in here, I was talking to an agent and a resident agent from Macon actually worked with me side by side for 13 hours yesterday.
What exactly are they doing in the investigation?
Well, they're handling some technical things and running down some leads for us that they can do faster.
What are the chances that she is still alive at this point?
Well, I certainly hope that she's still alive, but I'm not overly optimistic simply because of her husband.
What was the most recent phone calls or any information from that?
The most recent time we know somebody, excuse me, the most recent time we could confirm, and I've confirmed this myself by looking at it, was Thursday afternoon. Okay, but because of mail deliveries and things like that, we know that it goes a little bit beyond that.
You said there was no sign of forced entry, nothing ransacked in the home. Was there any sign of fingerprints, any physical evidence to show that someone else was
I'm not going to
in the
elaborate on anything of that nature.
Any credit cards or any financial statements been used?
Not at this time. Nothing we're aware of.
Is it safe, is it fair to say y'all really still don't have a lead? I mean, it's just because of the nature of the
Yes.
crime? Okay.
Have there been any calls that seemed like a promising lead and you go out and you think it's going to be something and
We're
your
getting,
head not even that much?
I want people to call, but we've had calls like we saw a boat at 2 o'clock in the morning on the lake. We can see a boat anytime at 2 o'clock in the morning on the lake. That's not, I don't mean that, it's not 285, my God, but it's, but boats are on our lakes late at night. People fish late at night. But we're following up on those when we get a call. We're questioning the people there. But if I had a good solid lead, guess what? I wouldn't be standing and talking to y'all.
They have security there 24 hours out at that game, you know?
Yes.
So is it possible that somebody, or probable that somebody came via boat?
I don't think it's any more probable that they came by boat than they came by car.
And the surveillance video was working, and you have looked through it?
We are trying to determine that now.
So we don't know if the security
We don't
cameras are working?
We don't know yet.
So do you think they possibly knew their killer, his killer?
It is indicative of that. But if I knock on your door and you come to the door and I stick my pistol in your face and I grab you, there may not be a struggle then, okay? But initially one would think is there's no forced entry or something like that, that they probably knew. But I can't absolutely say that for sure.
They have to call him security though, right?
Pardon?
They have to call security to be able to have access, right?
That's the way it's supposed to work.
Is there any other signs of physical trauma on the body, struggles, stabbings, wounds?
I'm not going to elaborate on that any further either.
Have they been having any work done in the house at all? Any?
I mean, these they're lawn maintenance people that work at all these homes are kept up immaculately. Almost all the people that live in these neighborhoods have landscapers and garden people that come there, monthly or weekly and do things. So that type of stuff does go on. We obviously have identified those people. In my knowledge, I'm not absolutely sure. I think we've already interviewed all of those people.
Any contractors, anybody coming to the neighborhood looking for work, or knocking on doors, anything like that?
There shouldn't be.
Sheriff, I'm sorry to ask you to elaborate about the absolutely most gruesome element of this, but can you just clarify, you did say that he was decapitated, but was his head with his body?
No, we do not have a head.
You said the children helped you rule out the possibility of torture. Is that still the case?
No, I didn't say that. I said the children have been completely cooperative with us and in every way. And I can't tell you whether, I have no way of knowing at this point in time whether he was tortured or anybody was tortured. I don't think, as I said earlier, I'm fairly confident that his head wasn't severed while he was alive.
Did they own a boat?
No.
When do you expect the preliminary report?
I've had portions of it already.
Yeah?
And I've told you all I'm going to do.
Everything. So, yeah. Sure. Thank you
And you
very
said
much.
they did or didn't own a boat?
They did not own a boat anymore. They did own a boat at one time, but they sold it a couple of years ago.
They have a dock though, right? Boat dock.
Pardon me?
They have a dock.
Oh, yeah, they have a dock, and they have a lift for a personal watercraft. They have a cover with a lift for a boat, but they sold those things several years ago. I've got the exact dates, but
But the dock is still there, functional. What do we know about them financially? Anything suspicious in their
No.
bank accounts? Any indication this might be organized crime?
no.
Do you know what kind of business he was in before he retired?
He had his most recent business venture, he had owned a series of fast food restaurants.
Do you know which one?
I think different ones at different times. I've been told Wendy's, and I've been told Hardee's, but it's been some time since he operated
It's from Atlanta. They were in Atlanta.
in the metro Atlanta. They moved here from Atlanta.
And before Atlanta, have they always been in Atlanta, or are they from
No.
North Carolina?
No. They lived in several. He was in the corporate world for a number of years and lived in several. They lived in several cities around the country.
On Friday, May 16th, 2014, 10 days after Russell Dermond's body had been found inside of his garage, some fishermen discovered a body floating face down in Lake Oconee. The body, which was later pulled from the water, was determined to be that of 87-year-old Shirley Wilcox Dermond, who had bloated to nearly twice her original size because of the time spent in the water. This discovery took place about 5 miles away from the Dermonds' lakeside property in the sprawling Lake Oconee near the Wallace Dam. As police would later learn, Shirley's body had been weighed down with rope and concrete blocks, which pulled her body below the surface, submerging it in nearly 50 feet of water and leading to the week-and-a-half-long search for her. Unlike her husband, Shirley had not been decapitated prior to her death, nor had she endured any type of sexual assault beforehand. However, she appeared to have died via blunt force trauma to the head, which was different than what police had theorized happened to Russell, but more on that in a bit. Police would later conduct extensive searches in the area where Shirley's body was found, hoping to recover either a murder weapon or Russell Dermond's missing head, but they were unsuccessful in both endeavors. After discovering Shirley's body, Putnam County Sheriff Howard Sills again took to the podium, delivering more startling news in a case that was unlike anything he had seen before.
About 2:30 this afternoon, we received a call here at the Sheriff's Office from some fishermen in Lake Oconee that they had spotted what they thought to be a body. My deputies immediately responded to that scene in a patrol boat and confirmed it was a body. Stayed there on the scene with DNR rangers and myself, along with other deputies and FBI agents, went to that scene. At which time we physically recovered the body of a female. Do I know for certain that this is the body of Shirley Dermond? I do not. I can't say that with 100% certainty, but it does fit the physical description of her, the hair color, and as well as some surgical scars that I was aware of. So I am fairly confident that this is the body of Ms. Dermond.
Can you tell us anything about the condition, Sheriff?
The condition of the body would have been consistent with the body being underwater until the gases that develop within it bring it up, and would be consistent with the time period that we believe Mr. Dermond was murdered.
Any signs of cause of death? And are you calling it a homicide?
It most definitely is a homicide. I will not speak on the minutia of this. I'm not going to. I don't even start. The body will be transferred to State Crime Lab in Atlanta, and cause of death will be determined there.
Sheriff, can you put in context where the body was discovered in relation to where the Dermond home is?
This body was discovered a good 5 to 6 miles from the Dermond home. down near the dam. We have GPS coordinates, of course, of where we actually pull the body from the water. And I anticipate that it actually is probably going to be in Greene County. It was near the center channel, but I anticipate when we actually plot that, it's going to be on the Greene County side. Greene County Sheriff's Office responded with us, as well as their coroner, our coroner. And the decision was made to let us have the body, regardless of which county it was in, because of the case that we were working.
So if the water is still, what does that tell you about the fact that her body was found that far away from her home?
Well, that question kind of answers itself, is that body was transported, or at least to that vicinity.
Without getting into the minutiae, as you called it, were there signs of trauma?
I'll be honest with you, I couldn't tell, and I didn't disturb the body. We want the lab and the pathologists at the state crime lab to do their thing. There was no glaring sign of trauma to the body. Now, but I stress to you, the body's decomposed. The extent of decomposition, has some effects that keep you from telling that. But no, her head was not removed or anything glaring like that.
It looked like there was any attempt to conceal the body at all? Did it appear?
Well, yeah, it's in the lake.
Any other attempts, like,
No, I'm not going to elaborate on anything else about the condition of the body. It's not prudent for me to do so in the context of this investigation.
To what extent are you searching that area for other evidence that you are looking for?
Well, obviously, we will do that to some extent. Now, this was approximately 50 foot of water, the depth there is near the main channel of the Oconee River that divides Greene and Putnam County at that point. And obviously, we're going to be out there. DNR asked to take the submersible vehicle that they have. We've been using in the cove. Already requested that. Now, what we'll find, I don't know. Like I said, it's very deep in that.
Sheriff, I know you've had a close contact with the family. Did you make the phone call to their children?
Of course I did. I would be talking to y'all if I
I guess, without going into the personal nature of a very personal conversation, can you just tell us what you were able to convey, given what you don't know?
One of the children, and asked that she contact the others, and I told her basically what I'm telling y'all right now, and not much more.
Are they headed back this way?
I told her I'd talk to her. I knew that y'all would be waiting on me, and so I told her I'd have to deal with that. Plus, we still got an investigation we're running here, some things we got to do, and so I did tell her I'd call her later.
How does this move your investigation forward? I mean, you've been looking for this to close this part of your investigation. What does this mean moving forward?
This jumps us about 2 checkers up on the checkerboard, shall we say. And even though it opens a whole new arena, shall we say, of the possibility of the criminals, or the probability of the criminals perpetrating crime by boat. There's a mode of transportation. We now, unfortunately, know that Shirley Dermond was murdered. We're no longer, unfortunately, seeking to rescue her. And as bad as that is, it progresses our investigation, and hopefully the pathology and the things we get from the lab will yield some pathological and forensic evidence that will aid us in finding out who did it.
Any indication that the body may have been weighted down, or there was an attempt to...
But
that's not talking about the body.
No, it is talking about the body because it's part of the body, but I'm just saying, I'm not going into the minutiae of this. We're conducting an investigation. The world doesn't need to know everything we do, and we don't need to jeopardize things at trial, and I'm not going into that.
Well, you mentioned transporting them as well. It couldn't have floated from the home to that area?
I don't think in that distance. This is a significant distance.
We'll be back after a short break. The investigation into this strange and horrifying case was headed by the aforementioned Putnam County Sheriff's Office, who obtained assistance early on from the FBI and other regional police agencies. Almost immediately, investigators gained access to Russell and Shirley Dermond's personal information, which included their banking and phone records, wondering if there might be some clue that led them to the culprit. Unfortunately, it did not seem like there was anything in their records linking them to anyone that seriously disliked them, let alone someone that wanted them dead. Police officials set out to establish a timeline for the crime, working through the Dermonds' records and witness reports to establish where they had last been seen. Through this, they discovered that on Thursday, May 1st, Shirley had played bridge with some friends in nearby Eatonton, and Russell had dropped by a Publix grocery store to buy some groceries. He also stopped by a bank to transfer some money, in a transaction that was not described as suspicious in any way. Later that night, they both spoke to their son via telephone. Reportedly, nothing seemed amiss during that conversation. The next day, May 2nd, a Friday, is believed to have been the last day accounted for by either Russell or Shirley. That day, a neighbor spotted Russell out on a walk in the neighborhood, as was his custom, and at some point, Shirley finished the crossword puzzle from that day's copy of USA Today. Investigators found it on the couple's kitchen table. After this, the day before their neighbor's Kentucky Derby party and 4 days before Russell's body was discovered inside their garage, investigators were unable to find any signs of life of the Dermonds. The Sunday and Monday newspapers were still in the driveway, and mail dating back to Saturday remained in their mailbox. Other than that, however, no one had seen or heard from the Dermonds all weekend, meaning that their killer could have struck any time after Russell returned from his walk that Friday. Yet, because of some specific details at the scene, investigators believed that they had been attacked and or killed the following Saturday morning, the day of the Kentucky Derby party. This hypothesis is based on a few facts. At the time of their deaths, Shirley was dressed as if she had been going somewhere, while Russell was wearing a t-shirt, boxer shorts, a robe, and slippers. The items that he would be wearing if he had just woken up and was drinking coffee and reading the newspaper. This would also explain why maybe the newspaper from Saturday was missing. Perhaps it had been handled by the killer at some point, and was disposed of along with the other applicable evidence. While the couple did live in a gated community, which did have security cameras and a guard office at the entrance, there were unfortunately a couple of issues with both. For starters, the guard office was only staffed part-time, and the security cameras were not working at the time, having shorted out due to an electrical storm nearby. This was sadly only discovered after Russell Dermond's body was found, so it wasn't a problem that anyone was aware of yet. And unfortunately, some of the couple's neighbors had security cameras on their property, but almost all were pointed towards the boats they owned, not toward the Dermonds' property. On a similar note, it is worth mentioning that the Dermonds lived on lakeside property and had a private dock leading up to their home. So it was theorized early on that their killer may have approached their house from the water, especially since Shirley's body was found in the middle of the lake. She'd likely either been killed out on a boat or had her body dumped from one. So this seemed like a very likely possibility. It's also worth noting that Russell and Shirley did not own a boat, having sold their own sometime prior to the murder taking place. It is also worth highlighting the fact that Lake Oconee is a very large body of water, with a surface area of 19,000 acres stretched out across 4 counties. So trying to pinpoint specific suspects across its shores, which span a length of nearly 400 miles, was like trying to find a needle in a haystack. Sadly, how the 2 victims had died was almost as confusing as why. Investigators were only ever able to determine the cause of death for Shirley, which they discovered was blunt force trauma to the head via an instrument similar to a hammer. She had been struck approximately 2 to 3 times with blows intended to kill her, and then had concrete blocks attached to her before her body was dumped in the middle of the lake. Yet she likely had not been killed inside or around her home, with no blood spatter being found by police or their dogs. Per Sheriff Howard Sills, her injuries were such that there should have been physical evidence left behind that simply wasn't there. Meanwhile, police were less lucky with Russell Dermond, whose head had still not been found by police, and never would be. Whoever had killed him had likely decapitated him after doing so, and then disposed of it elsewhere. Because of this, his cause of death was listed as traumatic head injury, due to no other life-threatening wounds being found on his body. As officials would later note, the cut that had severed his head from his body was incredibly clean, but police insisted it was not surgical. Rather, the killer had seemingly taken their time, perhaps using the collar on Russell's t-shirt as a guide and using an incredibly sharp knife, which, like the other evidence in this case, has never been identified or found. The killer had also strategically placed towels around the body to prevent the blood from seeping out underneath the nearby garage door. To that end, we can theorize that Russell Dermond had been shot in the head by an unknown subject who did not want to leave any evidence behind whatsoever, so they then decided to remove Russell's head from his body. Additionally, crime scene investigators reportedly found gunpowder residue on Russell's shirt collar, but no blood spatter within the home. So it was possible, if not likely, that he had been shot in the head elsewhere and then decapitated inside of his garage, but that leads to a number of other unanswered questions. Where had he died? Had it been in the garage where his body was found? Police don't believe so due to there being no evidence of a gunshot being fired in there except for the residue on Russell's shirt. But if he had been killed elsewhere, then you think there would be some evidence hinting at that, wouldn't you? Blood trails from him being carried to or from a boat or car, etc. The mysterious details of Russell's death, paired with the different set of factors regarding his wife Shirley's disappearance and the disposal of her body, created a confusing hodgepodge of different crime scenes for investigators. Who was killed first, and where? Was Russell first shot and killed inside the home, then Shirley abducted? Had the offender returned to the home to then decapitate Russell? Or had that occurred beforehand? And where exactly had Russell been killed? Residents did not recall hearing any gunshots or screams, so the details were incredibly murky. Sheriff Howard Sills spoke about that to reporters. "We don't know where all the crime scenes were in this case, and that's been a big problem. One was the water where Mrs. Dermond's body was recovered, which is certainly not the best crime scene. And number 2 is the house where Mr. Dermond's head was removed post-mortem after he was dead." Over the years, despite Sheriff Howard Sills being vocal about the case to the press, among other officials, police have been pretty mum about disclosing what evidence they were able to recover from the scenes. It is not believed that investigators had much in the way of forensic evidence to work with early on, such as fingerprints or evident DNA samples. Sheriff Sills made mention of items being sent off for forensic testing, and even retested, but did not really tip his hand toward anything specific. At least, not until recently, but that's something we'll explore near the end of the episode. Meanwhile, the case itself continued to move onward. Authorities continued to probe the specific details of the case, such as the who, what, when, and where, but struggled to answer the most basic of all, the why. Why had this mysterious killer or group of killers targeted Russell and Shirley Dermond? They were 2 retirees that did not have any known enemies, and they lived a quiet life along Lake Oconee. As I mentioned earlier, the 2 did not have any type of obscene wealth in their possession. With their home included, they did have a net worth of around $1.5 million, which is undoubtedly a fair bit of money, but it was tied into things like property and their retirement funds, stuff like that. Very little of it was in cash or jewelry, tangible things that could be stolen. Besides, police had found no evidence of a robbery taking place at all. None of the Dermonds' belongings were missing, including their electronics, jewelry, or medication. All of Shirley's jewelry was untouched, and none of Russell's Rolex watches appeared to be missing. In fact, the only things that looked out of place inside their home, other than the scene in the garage of course, were the couple's unmade bed and a lampshade that looked slightly askew. None of their possessions seemed to have even been moved, and officials made note of the scene appearing to be spotless, with the kitchen floor apparently being clean enough to eat off of. So with that being said, robbery appears to have not been a motive at all. That would leave behind few possibilities, none of which gave much hope to investigators. There was the possibility that this had either been a very personal crime, or maybe even a random act of violence. It being such a brutal crime gave investigators the belief that it had been personal, but they could not identify a single person that wanted either Russell or Shirley Dermond dead. Yet, whoever committed this crime seems to have had it out for the elderly couple, and they left behind a bizarre, horrifying mystery in their wake.
Lake Oconee Oconee Community Church finally held a memorial service for Russell and Shirley Dermond, the Putnam County couple who was murdered last year. Reverend David Keyes says it was postponed because of the ongoing investigation. Once church members realized it's possible the case could remain unsolved, they decided to hold the service on the one-year anniversary of their murder. Friends remembered Shirley's excellent bridge playing skills and Russell's one-of-a-kind sense of humor.
The reality is we may have to live with this for the rest of our lives, just never having a true answer as to why this occurred to Russ and Shirley. And so trying to help people realize that that's just part of life.
The couple was murdered at their Great Waters Reynolds Plantation home last May. The Putnam County Sheriff's Office still hasn't made an arrest in the case.
More after the break. As the investigation unfolded over the past decade, several theories regarding who had committed this crime and why have come to light, spawned by a variety of media figures, journalists and fellow podcasters, as well as web sleuths from different websites. The discussion about this mysterious story has run the gamut from the crime being committed by someone with a personal link to the Dermonds, to it being a professional hit or even a possible extortion attempt. First, we'll try and touch upon the possibility that the crime was committed by someone with a personal link to Russell or Shirley Dermond. Namely, it might be connected to someone I mentioned briefly at the beginning of the episode, Mark Dermond, Russell and Shirley's eldest son, who was shot and killed in a drug-related incident back in Atlanta in the year 2000. This incident was brought up early on by many web sleuths as possibly sharing a connection to Russell and Shirley's murder. That perhaps their son was connected to a shadowy cabal, that sort of thing. But there unfortunately seems to be little credence in that theory. For starters, the killer of Mark Dermond was identified by police and ultimately convicted in a court of law, and to this day, that person remains in prison, where they were at the time of the Lake Oconee murders. Secondly, at the time of Mark Dermond's death, he wasn't particularly close with his parents, having fallen down the unfortunate spiral of drug addiction. He'd reportedly even stolen from them in the months leading up to his death. If someone wanted to punish him from beyond the grave, targeting his parents and their retirement community 14 years later seems like an odd choice. If there is another similar incident from Russell and Shirley's past, police seem to not be aware of it. Throughout their digging, they were unable to find anyone with a serious grudge against the elderly couple. Whatever skeletons either of them may have had in their closet, neither were reportedly significant enough to pop up on anyone's radar. And they had not received any threatening emails or phone calls before their death, nothing like that. They had simply been going about their lives, and then poof, the next day, they were gone. Several of their family members and friends were investigated, including their adult children. Unable to come up with any type of ascertainable motive, investigators began exploring the possibility of Russell and Shirley's wealth being a motivating factor, speculating that maybe, just maybe, one of their descendants had been looking forward to their inheritance and wanted to speed things along. However, their children all lived out of state at the time, and had airtight alibis for the time of the crime, so they were quickly eliminated. Police have even gone as far as publicly clearing the Dermonds' family members in order to avoid rampant speculation from running amok. Does it remain possible that someone connected to the Dermonds wanted them dead? Of course. But has there been any known evidence linking anyone in their orbit to Russell and Shirley's murders? Not that anyone seems to be aware of. The next theory seems to center around the belief that this crime was the result of a criminal scheme, perhaps an extortion plot of some kind, or even a professional hit. We'll begin with the extortion theory, the idea that this crime was carried out in an attempt to extract money from Russell and Shirley. To that end, we'll first explore the possibility that there may have been more than one killer involved in this crime. This is something that extends beyond this one theory, and may be a theory in and of itself, due to the details. As we know, Russell and Shirley were each killed in different ways. Russell was likely shot and killed, then decapitated. Shirley was beaten to death with a hammer, or something like it, and then had her remains dumped in Lake Oconee. Because there were two different causes of death, many believe that there were two killers involved. Maybe one abducted Shirley and killed her elsewhere, while the other killed Russell inside of the Dermond home. Or maybe Russell was killed in front of Shirley in order to intimidate her. This brings us back to the extortion theory. Many theorize that Shirley was abducted and was potentially going to be held for ransom or taken to an ATM to withdraw cash, but then something happened. Maybe Russell fought back and was then shot. Then Shirley was beaten and dumped in the waters of Lake Oconee, and the entire scheme was abandoned. Something like that. Or maybe the culprits simply misidentified the Dermonds and believed them to be one of their wealthier neighbors, having targeted someone with a large amount of cash or jewels, etc. So there's that theory. Then there's the theory that this had been a professional hit, a theory that law enforcement have pushed back on over the years. In this theory, someone wanted the Dermonds dead for whatever reason, and hired someone to take care of it. Authorities seem to push back on this theory for a couple of pretty simple reasons. Namely, the fact that this crime seems to have been committed by someone Russell and Shirley knew. Then there's also the reality that this killer, while brutal and efficient, did not seem to be overly experienced. They left behind gunpowder residue on Russell's shirt, along with his decapitated body, and did not properly weigh down Shirley's body in the lake, so she was ultimately found just days later. One could argue that the killer technically does remain unidentified a decade later, so if this was a professional hit, they did do a good job. But authorities believe that this killer is, while efficient, both sloppy and lucky. In my opinion, when you take all of this into account, including the lack of any ascertainable motive, the idea of this killer being a professional hitman just doesn't seem likely. Some locals have long believed that some local teenagers were involved in the crime, based on rumors from people that knew Russell and Shirley Dermond and continue to live in the area. It's not known where these whispers started, but they do persevere to this day. These rumors allege that teenagers carried out this crime and may have received help from their parents or other loved ones, who helped them cover up the crime and hide evidence. However, depending on who you asked, they either did a great job by diluting the facts of the case, or they did a terrible job of botching what was supposed to have been a seamless robbery/scheme/what have you. This theory regarding a cover-up even extends to the local police, who continue to oversee the investigation to this day. Many who subscribe to this theory point to the fact that the local sheriff, Howard Sills, did not reach out to the state police for help. He did request assistance from the FBI early on, but not the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, citing some prior disagreements with them and their bureaucratic process. In doing so, he admitted that he worked with them as little as possible, only what he was legally required to. Those that believe in a police cover-up speculate that GBI resources could have helped bring this case to a conclusion, but that's impossible to know at this point. The FBI were themselves involved, and I find it hard to believe that they lack any of the investigative resources that the GBI could have offered. The murder of Russell and Shirley Dermond remains open and unsolved to this day, with police not so much as having a handle on the specifics of the crime itself. A motive remains elusive, and more minute details of the crime remain clouded in suspicion and intrigue. The Putnam County Sheriff's Office have received tips ranging from the believable to the bizarre, including one tipster who speculated that the killer belonged to a terrorist organization like Al-Qaeda or ISIS. Others believed that a religious cult was involved. One theorized that an alligator had attacked Russell in the garage and later dragged Shirley out to the lake, which is, well, it's definitely a theory. Because of the unsolved nature of this case, more specific details regarding suspects or persons of interest remain hidden behind a veil of secrecy, with police officials trying hard to ensure the integrity of their ongoing investigation. Many believe that whoever killed Russell and Shirley had a personal grudge against them, while others believe that this may have been a crime of opportunity, maybe one that went bad. Others still believe that a wandering serial killer may have been responsible, someone whose motivations have never been discovered, and whose other crimes have not been linked to this case. Yet, all we really know is that the person who killed 88-year-old Russell and 87-year-old Shirley Dermond decapitated Russell with a sharp knife, and killed Shirley with a hammer-like instrument before disposing of her body in the middle of Lake Oconee. In doing so, they likely had access to a boat at the time of the murders, likely one that was already docked at Lake Oconee, and were also able to get rid of Russell's head and the knife used to remove it from his remains. Local police continue to operate under the belief that the killer was someone that knew Russell and Shirley Dermond, or at least knew of them. and was likely familiar with the layout of their home. However, investigators do not believe that this killer lived in the area. If they did, they have managed to elude identification for an entire decade, in an area where violent crime like this is unheard of. The FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit provided a broad description of the culprit, describing them as a likely male that had an interest in guns and knives. When asked about this profile, however, Putnam County Sheriff Howard Sills described it as unhelpful, later telling the Union Recorder, "The bottom line of the profile that was worked up was that it was a male subject who probably liked guns and knives and things like that. Well, guess what? That's everybody in Georgia pretty much, certainly in Middle Georgia. It's not that I don't appreciate the fact that the BAU looked at the case and gave us some good questions to ask when we formulated questions to ask people, but the profile fits so many people." The culprit of this strange and horrifying mystery remains unidentified, but investigators remain hopeful that they'll be able to put a name to the faceless suspect in the near future. In doing so, they hope that they can help the loved ones of Russell and Shirley Dermond receive, if not closure, then at least some sense of justice. To that end, just months ago, Putnam County Sheriff Howard Sills announced that a piece of clothing belonging to Russell Dermond had been sent off for forensic testing. First to Othram Labs in Texas, and then to Sorensen Forensics in Utah. Both facilities were able to find DNA belonging to an unknown source, not Russell and not Shirley, which Sheriff Sills described as the most promising lead the case had received in a decade. From here, it looks like the next step will involve utilizing either national DNA databases such as CODIS, or perhaps even genealogical DNA testing to determine the identity of this unknown subject. Either way, it appears like this decade-old cold case may soon be coming to a close. At least, that's what authorities hope for. Per Special Agent Andy Smith from FBI Atlanta, "This is the first time we have confirmation of a sample that did not belong to Russell or Shirley Dermond. If the sample is good enough, which we will know very soon, we could put that into CODIS, which is a national database, to possibly identify an individual." With this announcement, which just so happened to coincide with the 10-year mark of the unsolved double murder, the FBI also announced a $20,000 reward for information leading to an arrest and conviction. Anyone with information is encouraged to reach out to either the FBI Atlanta field office at 770-216-3000, or the Putnam County Sheriff's Office at 706-485-8557. If you live outside of the US, you can contact your nearest American embassy or consulate, and you can even submit a tip online at tips.fbi.gov. Until such a time as vital information is submitted or DNA testing reveals a suspect, the stories of Russell and Shirley Dermond will remain unresolved. thanks for listening, y'all. This episode was researched, written, hosted, and produced by myself, Micheal Whelan. The music throughout the episode was also composed by myself, except where noted in the show notes. The producers for this episode, who support the show each month on Patreon, include Roberta Jansen, Sarah Moscaritolo, Ben Crocum, Scott Meesey, Marion Welsh, Jacinda Class, Lauren Nicole, James Weiss, Crystal J., Alex Kelleragopoulos, Annie Broad, Stephen Diaz, Riddis Bauza, Heather Fiddler, Anna T., and Brutalist. I know I say it all the time, but thank you all so much for your support. It really does mean the world to me. I would also like to shout out the other patrons who continue to support the show. You can become a producer or a patron by heading to patreon.com/unresolvedpod, where you can get access to our entire archive of bonus episodes, as well as the Patreon exclusive show Resolved. As I mentioned last week, I'm revisiting the BTK saga next and bringing that to a close, and I already have a couple of stories lined up to cover for the Unresolved bonus episodes. One, which I hope to record right after this, is a weird one. Make sure to join the Patreon and get all of those as soon as they come out. Before we wrap things up, I would like to again encourage anyone listening to leave the podcast a good review on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you get your shows. Those really do go a long way and can help ensure that Unresolved continues beyond this season. Thank you all for listening, and I hope to be back with another new episode very soon. Until then, I hope you all stay healthy, stay safe, and I will talk to you later.